Yesterday we shared about Elijah bringing the son of a widow back to life after he had died. And that's the first time that we read a story like that in the Bible, but it's obviously not the last. And one of the things that marked the ministry of Jesus was that multiple times, like Elijah, he brought someone back from the dead. We see that with the daughter of Jairus, the leader of the synagogue, in the Gospel of Mark. And we see it in today's passage, which is from Luke chapter 7, verses 11 to 17, which is the one that most parallels the story of Elijah and the widow and her son. In this case, Jesus and his disciples, followed by a large crowd, they're coming into a little village called Nain. And as they're coming in, they greet a funeral procession coming out. And the man who has died is the only son of a woman who is a widow. And our verses for today, verses 13 and 14, it says, "When the Lord saw her, the grieving mother, he had compassion for her and said to her, 'Do not weep.' Then he came forward and touched the bier, and the bearer stood still, and he said, 'Young man, I say to you, rise.' And he does. And great amazement seized everybody." And it's interesting, part of the response that you see in verse 16 is, "A great prophet has risen among us, and God has looked favorably on his people." A great prophet, referring back to because they knew their Elijah stories, and that this was something that Elijah had done, but nobody else had acted in a similar way in the prophets. So in all of the Gospels, we see in Mark, in Luke, in John, Jesus brings someone back from the dead. It's obviously very significant. And as I mentioned in the sermon, I mentioned this story from Luke and also that of the raising of Lazarus, which is the most dramatic because he had been dead the longest. But it's all these stories are showing the power of God at work in Christ to bring new life out of death, to restore life where life had been taken away. And while we don't see this happen very often, the fact that Jesus had the power to do this is attested to by the gospel writers. So in your own life, when you're facing something significant and hard, when it seems like maybe a part of you is dying or a part of your life is coming to an end, it's always a good time to turn to Jesus in prayer and to remember the words that Jesus spoke to Jairus. "Do not fear, only believe." No matter what challenge you may be facing today or I may be facing, holding on to those words, "Do not fear, only believe," is helpful, good, biblical advice.